Hello and welcome to Africa Today. I am Esther Mokwariola. From key defining moments to incredible political scenarios, 2018 can easily be termed the year of the good, the bad, and the interesting for Africa and the rest of the world. This year, news headlines featured both newcomers and old-timers, where people, policy, and power influenced almost all the events that shaped the continent in the last 12 months. Well, this special episode features Africa in Retrospect 2018 with key focus on events between January, February and March. We take a report now, and Africa Today will be right back. Welcome. Welcome back. Now joining me to look at the review of some top stories amid headlines in Africa, I have Achike Chude, political analyst and social commentator. And on Skype, I have Nweke, African affairs analyst and politician based in Belgium. Good to have you both on the program tonight.
Thank you.
Now let me begin with you now, Achike. Let's start with this particular story which made headlines during the start of the year. That was when United States President Donald Trump called all African countries shithole countries. Well, according to him, it was reportedly, according to the President of the United States, that migrants from places like Haiti, El Salvador, and Africa are from shithole countries. And the African Union reacted to it strongly with the disappointing comments and also raising further questions on Africa's place in the United States foreign policy under President Donald Trump. Now, with that thing in mind, do you think African countries have learned from such incidents when it has been termed as shithole countries and making, efforts to change such narrative?
Well, it was most undiplomatic statement from a world leader, from the leader of a country, especially a country like the United States of America. Much more was expected. But then I think the world has gotten used to, accustomed to the kind of bombasts that come from the President, Donald Trump, from time to time. He does that in-house within America, domestically, and keeps on having this issue with the media. And so that statement really about African countries was most unfortunate, and I think he regretted that almost immediately he made that statement, because the repercussion of that statement, I think, went far and wide. And just like you said, the African continent did not take kindly to that, really. But I think there was something quite, interesting about that when the matter came up, because I remember that it became an issue, not just, within the African continent, but in Nigeria itself, it was also an issue.
Absolutely.
Where a lot of Nigerians themselves, and I think that some Africans in general, accepted, the narrative from, not because they liked being called, a shithole country, but because I think,
what's on the ground.
Because of what's on the ground. And a lot of people were saying, look, let us say it as it is. This is the truth about our continent. Nothing is working. People are frustrated. And a lot of Africans are escaping from their countries to other countries that have been built by citizens of other countries, of those nations. And so we need to do something about this. So it was not as if they willingly accepted that term, because they liked that the appellation of coming from a shithole country, but because they felt that if they can cotton on to that narrative, that perhaps and make enough noise, it might shame the leadership within the continent into having a little bit of introspection about themselves and the place of the continent in the world today. You know, so like I say, it was an unfortunate statement, but it forced or it made us to do a rethink and do some, you know, introspection about the place of the African in the continent
and in the world
today,
as well.
yes, and in the world as well.
Now, Collins, from your perspective, in as much as it has been believed that Africans, you know, are from shithole countries, do you think perhaps right now we're moving towards changing that narrative?
Well, there aren't very much, you know, strong indications that we are, though there have been isolated incidents of a number of progress being made. But let me just, you know, quickly divorce two matters that people appear to be confusing, especially when this issue came up. Now, when a matter of this nature comes up as it did, I think the appropriate thing to do was what the African Union did, which was condemn the statement in no uncertain terms.
Right.
Now, there might be some truth about, you know, the derogatory statement, but looking into the truth about it and trying to find out what you can learn from it in terms of moving your continent forward, it's a separate matter that should not, under any circumstances, be mixed up with condemning it just like the African Union did. So they did a good thing. But one will expect that thereafter, in closed doors, they will then begin to say, come on, guys, let's take a look at the truth in this matter. I hope they did that. You know, there are signs, of course, like I rightly pointed out earlier on, that there have been some isolated incidents of deepening democracy, you know, governance issues, you know, taking a turn for the better and so on and so forth. But they are still very much, you know, below expectation.
Okay, now let's shift our turn from, you know, this narrative to the area of politics. Achike, let's look at the elections that held at the start of the year. In January, we had elections of Liberia, we had Kenya, we had South Africa. But let's look at Liberia first. Liberia had the former professional footballer, George Weah, becoming the president, taking over from Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. And we know what happened then. It was believed that Ellen Johnson Sirleaf was more or less supporting the Liberian president that right now, you know, based on political reasons she had with her vice president, that's Joseph Boakai. But now, now that Joseph Weah, so sorry for that. Now that George Weah is the president of Liberia. Now, what are your thoughts on the turn of events in the country, especially as the former professional footballer, you know, took over the affairs? Do you think perhaps it has made the country better off?
Well, I think his presidency is, you know, should be a profile in courage and in ambition. This is somebody that did not have the benefit of education, at least to tertiary school level, and then because of his popularity, he did a lot. He came in, he was a first-class philanthropist. He tried to do so much for the Liberian people. From the money he got, you know, he made as a footballer. He was former World Footballer of the Year, African Footballer of the Year at the time, European Footballer of the Year. I mean, his accolades were something else. He had achieved so much. And then he brought some of these monies back to help to take his people out of poverty as much as he could. You know, so it was inevitable when he showed interest the very first time and ran for election. In fact, there were those who felt that he actually won that election. He had a lot of support within, you know, Liberia. But again, a combination, we're told, of, you know, forces, conspiracy among African leaders felt that, look, this was an upstart from virtually nowhere, you know, wanting to go into politics at the highest level. And so perhaps a combination of these factors stopped him from, you know, ascending the presidency of Liberia. So it was a matter of time. He went to school, you know, and developed himself and came back, went into, you know, politics, the National Assembly, and then contested again. And this time around, he got the mandate of the people, and then he's now president. It is still too early to tell, but the reality is that since he came in, there has been some measure of stability within Liberia itself. So I think he's been able to do something in that direction. Though, of course, that started from, you know, Johnson Sirleaf. after the war in Liberia, there was some, period of stability, and that country was stabilized for some time. Though it is still mired in serious economic issues and all that. So these are some of the challenges that the president of Liberia is going to have to tackle, and I believe he's tackling. And that he has shown that he has a disposition. He has shown enough love and enough patriotism for his country. He has done it when he was not in power. He has ascended political power for the purpose of also extending that which he had been doing when he was not a politician, a philanthropist and a footballer. And I think it is time will tell really how effective it's going to be. But in terms of disposition, in terms of his courage and his moral character, I think that this is what is even more critical, perhaps much more critical than even your educational achievements, because all over the continent, we have had very, highly educated people who should have known what to do when they get to power.
Right.
But we have seen, people abdicating, showing that they really learned nothing by the way they conducted themselves in office. So I think the moral imperative is becoming much more important than even educational qualification. Yes, it is good to be educated, it is good to be qualified, so that especially in the 21st century, there are new dynamics, new challenges, you need to compete favorably and so on. But the reality is that you can have all the knowledge in the world. If you do not have the right moral temperament and integrity, then your education stands for nothing.
Right. Now, Collins, do you share the same thoughts with Achike in the studio with me?
To a very large extent, especially the imperative of the time of electing people with, strong moral principles, especially also people, who made them, who are self-made, okay? People who started from nothing and then, became something, okay? Now, I think the story of Africa that it helps or that it has started to help to retell is the fact that you don't necessarily need to be part of the high political elite to be able to make it to political power. And I believe that young people seeing what George Weah has achieved will be motivated and inspired. Now, so far, he has done reasonably well. I mean, I wouldn't give him a full mark for what he has done in Liberia so far. Consolidating the peace in Liberia, building on what Johnson Sirleaf had achieved, was a very clever one, and of course, inevitable. I believe that ultimately, what will determine the success or otherwise of George Weah's presidency in Liberia is his ability to surround himself with experts. I mean, as a leader, I believe that your greatest asset is the ability to identify the right kind of people that will fill up some of your deficiencies. And all of us have our deficiencies, but the ability to get the right people to, into the right places, for example, economy, which is very, very important, is very, very critical. The extent to which he has managed to do that so far is not, is a little bit doubtful. But, of course, his international credential has given him quite a lot of leeway, and I hope he's able to now use that to drive investment and to drive more goodwill into Liberia.
Right, let's quickly go on a very quick break. You're watching Africa Today, and we've been looking at Africa in Retrospect 2018 with key focus on events between January, February and March. Welcome back. It's still on to Africa Today, and we're still looking at we have a special episode today which features Africa in Retrospect 2018 with key focus on events between January, February and March. And I still have my guests in the studio, Achike, Chude, and on Skype I have Collins and Nweke. We've been discussing this issue earlier. Now let's still look at this matter of politics. Now let's look at Kenya. Collins, talking about what happened last year where Kenya held its election, and to the expectation of all, Uhuru Kenyatta emerged the winner. But the turn of events in January saw the opposition Raila Odinga holding an unofficial inauguration attended by thousands of people as the people's president, while the opposition party at the time created a People's Assembly, setting off harsh government words and a media crackdown. Now, surely you remember the turn of events that happened then in Kenya and what led to that. But since then, both parties, that's Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga, have both sheathed their swords and perhaps thought it wise to move on, to pursue a greater Kenya. But how would you assess the political developments in the region since that period?
Pretty interesting. Interesting in the sense that I'm sure quite a number of, my supporters will disagree with me on this. But ironically, I believe that Odinga actually showed himself as a political crocodile, a political colossus in the action that he took. Because on retrospect, you will see that had he not taken the action that he took, which was a purely political action, and in no way did he break the law, it was, something symbolic. He was then able to show to the president or the people of Kenya that he has the capacity to still mobilize people, and if things, are not handled properly, that all of those could lead to mayhem. Now, people could doubt that his action was actually what triggered the peace move from Kenyatta that has now brought some sort of political stability in the country, where they have shielded their swords, like you said, and are now working together to see how best the country could be managed. Now, let's not forget the fact that, they are still political opponents. So the fact that they have shielded the sword does not necessarily mean that there are no oppositions in Kenya anymore. Certainly, there are, political opposition, but, making it a do-or-die affair with, the propensity to cause some destabilization in Kenya was actually taken away by the fact that both of them were able to, come back to the negotiating table and determine the rules of the game.
Now, Achike, from what he's just put out, definitely it is good that Kenya has decided to move from the past and perhaps move to a better future for themselves, which would happen in terms of political developments and all. But what lessons do you think can be learned in this case? Because it's not the first. We can have such happening again in other regions, in other countries in the continent. What lessons can be learned from what happened in Kenya?
It's a rehash from the past. The parents, the fathers were partners, were rivals, and so we see that also playing out in their children. What has happened really has happened, but again, it's politics. It was politics that almost got out of hands, but politics that eventually matured minds were able to sit down and then, were able to reconcile their differences and then, sat down, to move Kenya forward. I do not also forget that they also were aware of repercussions, especially Odinga. Some of the elections that we had in Kenya that eventually descended into chaos and anarchy. We had a lot of killings along ethnic lines.
Right.
This eventually became a matter for the International Criminal Court, which, the president, I think, has, is still, perhaps by the time he leaves as president of Kenya, he will still have to, answer. And then his vice, Ruto, also had the case to answer. So I think Odinga was also aware that there was also that possibility of them not being able to control what had happened. He had made his impact during the election, and then he had lost that election. It became a matter for the courts that were resolved one way or the other, but he didn't accept it. But having built momentum, having shown that he had capacity, he also realized that Kenya, is bigger than every single one of them. And I think that that is a lesson to learn, that you cannot push the button too far, to the point of self-destruction, because at that moment, everybody is going to suffer the consequences. And so I think it takes leadership, it takes statesmanship to somewhere along the line swallow your pride and look at the bigger picture, that the country ultimately at the end of the day is bigger than every single one of us. And so our personal interests must be subsumed by the greater interest of the country, of everybody. And that is a lesson that African leaders need to learn. And there are so many that have not learned that lesson, so many. You know, you have countries, for instance, in Cameroon, you have places like in Burundi, you have places like in the Democratic Republic of Congo and the rest, where all it takes is just for a little bit of statesmanship. We have seen this. There's a little bit of lining in the horizon. We have seen that with, you know, Ahmed Abiy in Ethiopia. He has done marvelously well, and it's a shining light for the African continent that we still have within us a beacon of hope that there are still people who are imbued with the right fervor, with the right sense of patriotism, you know, and sense of duty to their continent and to their people and to their countries and all of that. And it's a matter of these people getting to the right position and showing the kind of bravery and courage that is needed to transform things, and things will be transformed for the good of all. Absolutely.
But let's look at this issue now, still on politics. Let's look at what happened in South Africa, where we saw Jacob Zuma, you know, resigning amid pressure, you know, from his African National Congress party, and had barely survived 8 no-confidence votes held against him since the beginning of his tenure as president in 2009. And thereafter, we saw the election of Cyril Ramaphosa as the president of South Africa. And it was expected that he would serve Cyril Ramaphosa, who was a former trade unionist and a businessman, and was narrowly elected the head of the ruling party, that's the ANC, in a close election against Zuma's ex-wife, Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. Now, Achike, from your perspective, what do you make of the events that saw the removal of Jacob Zuma, with the whole scenario, with the whole drama of him having to have survived impeachment threats, notice and all of that, and the election of Cyril Ramaphosa, where one wouldn't have expected such to have happened, and of course, the Rainbow Nation, you know, facing so much of division, facing so much of challenges, how this new leadership is able to bring the country together and make it stand as it was known as a Rainbow Nation.
Yeah, well, a cat has 9 lives, we're told, and you just described that he survived 8 impeachment plots, so he had 8 lives. I think the 9th life, you know, was where he came unstuck. And because a lot of people he's had scandals from the very moment he came to power. He was not able to, you know, separate himself from all manners of scandal, from the HIV, you know, issue when he said, you know, he could have unprotected sex and all of that. That was quite unbecoming of a president. You know, and so many things. Then the corruption scandals, the arms scandals and all of that, all linking up to him. And these were the things that led to the various impeachment moves against him. But somehow he seemed to survive every single one of them. You know, so except for this very last time. But again, like Jacob Zuma, the former the Prime Minister of South Africa, I think before him, the President of South Africa before him, what's his name now?
Simon Mbeki?
Yes, Mbeki, like Mbeki, like Zuma, because this was the same thing that he had done that he did to Mbeki. You know, a lot of people thought that he was going to allow, you know, Mbeki finish his term and all of that. He did not allow. So when Ramaphosa had his opportunity, he did not also give him that leeway and all of that. But the reality is he had to go at a time. He had become increasingly unpopular. The scandals were becoming too much and an embarrassment to South Africa. Of course, one of the unfortunate incidences we saw during the burial ceremony of that great man, Nelson Mandela, was the fact that a lot of South Africans in the stadium, before international statesmen and guests, were booing their own president. Now that was scandalous. That was the height, you know. And so it was time for him to go. And so when that time came and the opportunity arose, Cyril Ramaphosa took advantage of that. And of course, they also needed to do that to save the ANC, whose influence had continued to wane and plummet at an alarming rate. ANC that came in by the time, you know, being the first government after after apartheid, won so much, virtually all the seats in South Africa, but over time their influence had dwindled drastically. And the last municipal elections, the elections we had in South Africa, showed just how far the ANC had fallen. So they needed to move, because the reality is that a lot of people, you know, still look back to what the ANC had done for them. And so you have a lot of sentiments. But you now have a younger generation of South Africans who did not exactly know the battles that the leadership of the ANC and the ANC in general fought on their behalf. And so these people, and then a lot of other people were alienated. The economy of South Africa, Jacob Zuma did not do much, and youth employment and so many other myriads of socio-economic political problems also beset, you know, South Africa. So, like I said, it was time to go. And then Cyril Ramaphosa came in, and then the next thing we knew was that Jacob Zuma had become history, and South Africa was now destined, you know, for a different path. And so, whether they are actually going to do much more than Jacob Zuma had done and Thabo Mbeki, I think that is left for the new leadership of South Africa.
Okay, now let's quickly get your closing remarks on this now, Collins Nweke, before we wrap up the show. What are your thoughts?
My thought is that it was obvious from the very beginning that Zuma was Zuma's worst enemy. Now, he didn't quite have the depth of character to lead a modern democratic society because of you know, some of his you know, inconsequential attitudes, and there are quite a number of them right from the beginning. But you see, it took quite a while before he you know, actually fell. Like Achike said, he became that proverbial cat that had 9 lives. And what sustained him in office for as long as he was there was actually the strength of the ANC. Yeah. Very powerful, and you know, was able to give him all the necessary backings. Now, as a trade unionist, of course, he also carried along a very strong baggage of you know, young men and women who identified with his struggle. Don't forget, he's somebody of a very basic background, who also you know, rose through the ranks and you know, came to the leadership of the ANC, and then ultimately the leadership of the country. So the common man, the militants, the ANC militants, identified very much with him. But part of the nemesis with him, but part of the nemesis that befell him was the breakout of the economic freedom fighters that actually formed their own parties. And doing that, they took along with them quite a sizable number of the militants that actually supported Zuma.
All right, very briefly, Collins, about to wrap up the show.
Yes. Well, so indeed, he fell because it became inevitable. And don't forget, you know, Ramaphosa was never a very happy man because he believed that the president, he was robbed of the presidency. So he struck when he should, and then Zuma became history, which is a good thing for Africa. By way of conclusion, to say that power cannot be forever. African leaders have got to understand that at some point, when the people you are leading are no longer satisfied with you, it's time to go.
All right, and on that final note, I'd like to thank you, Collins Nweke, for your analysis and input on the show, and of course, my guest in the studio, Achike Chude. Thank you very much for your time on Africa Today. We would have had lots of discussions to do, but you know, time is always a factor here. Well, it has been an eventful 2018 with so much to reflect on, knowing that in the last 12 months, history was made, heroes were lost, hope were renewed, and lives were affected in the course of the year. Well, it's now time for lessons of the past to become guidelines for the future and inspire sustainable development on the continent in 2019 and beyond. And that is our package for tonight. But don't forget to join the conversation as usual on Twitter at TVC News NG, and follow me for updates around Africa at Esther TVC News. Until the next one again, I am Esther Makwariola, and always remember, Africa can only get better.